Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Against the Ice. Another survival film. A lot of people had enjoyed stuff like Gold with Zac Efron, and probably still to this day, probably a number of people will probably enjoy Tom Hanks's Castaway. Whether that's trending or not, it is what it is. But people love survival films. I don't know why. Just to kind of see somebody else in anguish. But hey, they're getting paid, so... But still, like, they're miserable. The one thing in the back of my mind, I'm thinking between these two characters, I'm hoping that these are characters that are very well used to the cold. Because, man, you're, like, trudging through all this territory, and it's freaking, like, cold as a mother... and you're spending, like, months out of your life consistently in a wintry environment. And I'm just kind of curious if these characters, like, were they, of course, to be, like, accustomed to this, or maybe they're just like, oh no, we had, like, so-and-so, like, weathered coats and temperature stuff and, like, all these, like, goofy equipment things that eventually, we find out later, like, they weren't roughing it so bad. Like, of course, we have certain characters like RoboCop, the more current version of it, where he had, like, temperatured suits to kind of keep his body cool and stuff like that. So I was kind of wondering the same thing for these characters. Because, hey, like, that would make all the sense in the world if that were to have been the story here. But anyways, so going into this movie immediately reminded me of the movie called The Edge that had, like, Anthony Hopkins and Alec Baldwin, two characters who eventually have to fight off a bear in a film. You ever seen the movie The Edge? That movie's pretty good. I thoroughly enjoy it because we find out that Alec Baldwin is the new lover of Anthony Hopkins' wife, or ex-wife. And so there's kind of some rough terrain there. It's been a while since I've seen The Edge. Maybe I'll go back and I'll find out it's a tweakingly different story, but, like, it is what it is. So, a survival film. We have this group of characters that are going on and trying to follow the Denmark expedition. Trying to go on and using a number of sled dogs and stuff like that to try and find out how far somebody was to get. And it seems like these guys would go on and have these little kind of rock collections called cans that would have these certain specific notes listing how far they got, or just kind of, like, showcasing, like, telling everybody, like, what's kind of going on through these notes, through these journals. So we have our characters going on and trying to find out if they're going to discover any new island, or really if what they're really trying to find out is if this new stretch of Greenland is something that's already attached to Greenland and not its own island. So, with that said, we mainly focus on Mikkelsen and Ivar, who is to be a guy, Ivar, who volunteers for the misery that he's about to have. And I feel bad for laughing, just because, yeah, like, this is based on a true story, and these guys are having to sacrifice so much, even their sanity at some points, all to go on and make this journey to just find out if a stretch of land exists or not. And I'm just like, what? Just, man, these guys, like, what an incredible journey uh, that these guys had to go on to just to make sure that something exists or not. Like Columbus, like, same kind of story. Like, we have this guy who's like, there's got to be some kind of other land over here, and all of a sudden he discovers what eventually becomes North America, and eventually what becomes South America, and so on and so forth. So, with that said, I would have to say that this is a. I would say that this is an interesting film. Like, I wouldn't say that this is a bad film. There's some parts where I'm just like, whoa, like, oh my god, like, this is okay, this is really crazy. Cause like there is one point where I kind of looked to kind of take a little swig of something, and then I turned back, and then I'm all of a sudden like seeing like stuff go down in this movie, and we'll get to that in spoilers. Uh, and I'm just like, oh my god, what did I miss? So I had to flip back a little bit to just like, oh my god, what's going on? And this movie gets freaking crazy at some points. Uh, and you're also like, if you're an animal lover, you may not like this film. So letting everybody know that right there. If you love dogs in this movie, if you love bears, if you like animals in general, you might just not like this film. But that's what happens when you watch a survival film. Eventually, people need to eat. Or other animals need to eat at some point. So, with that said, let's just go into that double five. Let's otherwise just say that it's about that time yet again to go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I get to spoil this movie. Thank you for otherwise watching this review. I really do appreciate it. So let's get into the nitty gritty about this film, and I don't think I'm going to go into every single little detail, but now that we're in spoilers, freaking somebody loses their gosh darn mind. And rationally, I completely understand that. Especially with being in a cold environment consistently, and just for the surefire fact that, like, you're just realizing that all hope is probably lost. And so, yeah, like, you're immediately thinking, I'm probably going to die here. So, the early stages of this movie is to tell us Mikkelsen is to put on this excavation, I guess, funded by the Greenland government to figure out what had happened to the Denmark expedition, to have them make it, to see if there was this Perry Island or not. So Mikkelsen goes on, and he is to come back with one of his men on this sledding expedition. And this guy, of course, is to get frostbite on his feet. And so they start having to chop some toes off the man. What a crazy way to begin this story. But I'm assuming that's naturally what happened in the very beginning of this movie. So we have Iverson go on to Mikkelsen and say, like, hey, like, I get that I'm only a mechanic, and, like, because this boat that they're on just kind of hit against this one part of this land, and so considering this boat is just kind of stuck where it is, Iverson is to volunteer to go out there with Mikkelsen to eventually find this can that they're looking for, to find these notes from these previous explorers. So Iverson is to be a little bit clumsy with these sled dogs. And so Mickelson is kind of asking around uh, with other men, saying like, you know what, that Iverson fella, do you do you think that he's reliable? Like, do you think that like he'll work well? And the other officer goes on, and he's just like, well, like, yeah, he might be a little green or inexperienced as far as like sled dogs goes, and whatever, but he'll get good at it. And so like this guy is just saying like, give him a chance, see what happens. He's probably gonna die out there anyways. You might as well. So Mickelson is just like, okay, like I can take this guy on. He's a young guy. He's a young buck. But I think that'll just probably make him easier to just like kind of take the reins from me and listen to what I have to say and take orders well. So we have Mickelson that goes with Iverson on these two different sleds with these two different dogs. And so they go on to sled their way to, of course, make it through this stretch of land. I'm going to go through the big bullet point events that kind of happen here, because there's just kind of a lot of just like over these mountains and over the hills to grandmother's house we go kind of thing. It's kind of like you kind of see these characters that have to maneuver like up these kind of inclines and have these dogs kind of like dragging, like trying to pull this sled up these inclines, and you get a lot of just kind of them like figuring how these dogs can go and do these sleds, which we see a very different amount of sleds being used in this movie, because we have dog sleds and then we have like the guys who are pushing their own sleds, and so yeah, it gets kind of a wide variety of kind of different slices of things. So we had Iverson before he leaves. They were telling him, hey, like once you kind of run out of your supplies, you're gonna have to go on and shoot your least best dog and kind of either feed him to the other dogs or feed him to yourself if you just start to really lose supplies to try to make it back. So Iverson and Mickelson, we have them, of course, making their way, and we have Mickelson who is to take this thing of water, and he is to spit it out onto the back or onto the like the sled part of their sleds, the kind of little winged parts, so they can go a lot faster because they'll have like that thin layer of ice. So we have Mickelson and we have Iverson kind of quickly going through, and they're like, yeah, and so we just have Mickelson and Iverson who are just kind of having fun. Iverson kind of jumps on his sled and just kind of lets the dogs just go. All of a sudden, Mickelson is realizing that there might be a point where there might be a decline in the stretch of land, meaning that there might be a cliff up ahead. Iverson all of a sudden is kind of hearing what Mickelson is to say, and he's like, oh yeah, I should probably like figure out a way to stop, because Mickelson is kind of telling him like, yeah, you should probably stop soon. Iverson tries to get back onto the back of the sled. All of a sudden he ends up falling off the sled. The dogs go further, way further into the decline of this this little cliff, and we have Iverson almost lose everything. Luckily, like the they kept the sled and some of the dogs, and Iverson had his lead dog called Bjorn, and Mickelson is trying to tell Iverson that they're just dogs. Like, don't get attached to them. At one point, we have both Iverson and both Mickelson who are in their tent together, and Iverson is like, hey, I guess, like, Bjorn is kind of whimpering. Like, should I bring him in with us to kind of sleep for the night? And Mickelson just kind of turns off the lamp and he goes to bed because he's like, I'm not going to tell you no. Like, I'm not going to tell you yes either. Like, they're just dogs. Like, it's nice to pet them, but they're going to die. Just realize that. So Iverson is to realize that his one lead dog is on the side of this, on the side of this ledge, just being held by this rope. Iverson's trying to pull this rope. All of a sudden, the rope snaps, and Iverson loses Bjorn. He dies, sadly. Bjorn! No! So, we kind of have Iverson, who usually kind of states the obvious, or goes on and just like, well, like... Iverson is to mention that they lost 2 weeks of dog food, and they lost Bjorn. And Mickelson's like, yeah, I get it. Like, oh well, like, we'd have lost him anyways. It's lucky that we didn't lose everything from that sled. We were that freaking lucky. Because we have Iverson who goes on, and every time, like, something is to, like, go amiss, he has to, like, mention the one thing that is no longer, like, with them. Yeah, we did have 2 bullets, but guess who wasted those? Somebody. Anyways. So, Iverson and Mickelson are to, of course, start making their way. And they end up getting into these kind of interesting places where they kind of have to, like, slowly kind of like walk their way through, because, like, there's very icy territory, and so these guys are kind of roping themselves, like, across this very icy territory, and it's like really it's really interesting. So at one spot, so Mickelson and Iverson are to continue on to have both of them finally at some point make it to this can where they're kind of pushing away all these rocks. But I realize there's a moment before that, so let me get to that, and then I'll get to the one. Or no, wait. It doesn't matter. I'll get to it either way. So Mickelson and Iverson gets to this rock thing where they find out this report, and they realize that the island that was to be called this island is not an island whatsoever. It's actually just another part of land of Greenland. And so we had these 2 characters go all the way to just try to get to this piece of paper to find out that they didn't need to go all the way out there because it's not an island. It's just a stretch of land that is just outstretched Greenland. So, like, wow. So, like, they realized how, like, okay, like, this whole excavation is over, so we just need to go back home. And at one point, we have both Iverson and Mickelson who are trying to get food. Because all of a sudden, they're starting to more and more have to start to, sadly enough, start to kill off their dogs. so they can feed their other dogs, and some dogs are dying from exhaustion, and like kind of like a horse that's been ridden too hard, sadly. All of a sudden, we have Iverson, who's to mention, it's like, well, hey, I think I saw I think I saw bunnies somewhere. I think I saw like an otter somewhere. I'm gonna go after him. So Iverson goes and takes this gun, trying to line it up, seeing this otter that, of course, is out in the boonies somewhere. Iverson starts to hear these dogs starts barking like crazy. All of a sudden, the otter goes ploosh back into the water, and Iverson's like, "What the fuck? Like, shut up, dogs! Shut up!" All of a sudden, Iverson is to hear gunfire. He's like, "What the heck is going on?" Iverson runs back to wherever Mickelson is. All of a sudden, Mickelson is being attacked by a polar bear. I'm like, what? This is insane. I think he's trying to pretend that he's dead, but his eyes are open. And so, like, this bear is, like, pushing on his chest and, like, kind of slapping him around a little bit. And so Iverson tries to, like, shoot this bear with this rifle. And all of a sudden, we have not only, like, the polar bear, but then Mickelson is to get into some thin ice, and both of them crack and fall. I'm like, oh my god. This is awful. And they couldn't save the polar bear because, of course, the polar bear is way too heavy and it's dead weight, basically. But man, if they could have just saved that meat, man, would that have, like, been something. So, but mood point. Mickelson is the more important thing. Mickelson was to hold on, I think, to one of the ropes that was to be on the sled, and so the sled starts falling in, and Iverson is to grab onto the sled, and then is to go and try to pull Mickelson out. Definitely trying to get Mickelson as warm as he possibly can, and Iverson is just like, oh my god, like, I can't believe your clothes, like, aren't, like, shredded like, horrifically from this bear. And we have both these characters who are to mention that they're just lucky guys, and we have that to kind of just be a theme throughout this story, how they're just lucky, even though I don't know how lucky they can really say that they are at some points. So Mickelson and Iverson are to realize that they need to make their way back. And I'm kind of like, I want to know the thought process of Mickelson while he's trying to, like, drudge his way back to his people. Like, is he thinking, like, I did all of this for freaking nothing? Like, I wanted to go and find, like, this thing. Like, I wanted to just, like, find this unique thing no one else knows about. But Mickelson is telling Iverson, it's like, well, hey, like, maybe we'll be famous when we make our way back. And Iverson's like, me? Famous? Really? I don't know. So they're about, like, they're quite a bit of ways. And Mickelson is thinking that they're probably not going to make it back. That they might die trying to get back. Mickelson decides to create a can to put their notes and a bunch of stuff all in these rocks, and then try to make their way back to their people. Because it gets to the point when they're at this point, like, they've pretty much lost everything. Like, they've lost their food, they've lost every single one of their dogs, to the point of them eating one of the dog's liver, which of course makes them sick. because they're trying to figure out whether or not they could understand if this liver is going to be poisonous or not. Mickelson is to have this locket that is to be made of silver, and so they're dipping it into this thing, trying to figure out if it's poisonous or not, and they can't really figure out the color. And so they just start eating, and they barf it up shortly thereafter, because of course, like, the food is poisoned. And Mickelson was to say, it's like, well, yeah, like, I don't think we should trust eating the liver because we'll probably get sick from that. But there was no other, like, body part left on this dog that was to really be, like, an edible thing, because this dog was had just died from exhaustion, sadly. So none of the dogs survive, especially after that bear attack. They really... So we have these guys go on, get this can, and then make their way back to the camp. All of a sudden, they are to spot this kind of lookout thing of the ship. And they're like, oh my god, like, we saw the ship Alabama, like, we're home. Thank God. So they continue to make their way to their ship to find out that the guys had taken every ship part and converted it into some huts, some shacks. And they're like, okay, like, yeah, we must have been gone for a really long time. They go into the shacks, they go in the huts to find out these guys left. And I'm like, oh my god, these guys left. You've got to be kidding me. We find out the guys had gotten picked up by some whaler or some whale ship. Like some guys, I guess, who were like hunting whales and fish and whatever. These guys ended up getting picked up by them, and they head back to Nearguard, who is also to be Charles Dance. Of course, a lot of people know him from Game of Thrones, as well as probably some other character that would probably be a Game of Thrones guy. I don't know, maybe a guy named Nicoliage? Nicoliage? Is that somewhere close? Whoever is Mickelson. Game of Thrones. I wonder what was the promoting factor of this whole movie. Hey, a Game of Thrones technical reunion. We don't really like see either one of them until the very end of the films. Anyways, so we have them going on, and they're like, "Oh my god, like they left us. We're gonna be here forever. We're gonna die." Because the two men that, of course, were with that ship and got saved, they went on back to the Greenland government, and they're like, oh no, we're not going to go on and send another person out to save those men. We're not going to go back and see if they made it. No, F those guys, we're not going to send anybody. And these guys are like, but wait a minute, like, the guys keep coming back to Nearguard, and it's like, well, like, we gave them, like, a year's worth of food, so, like, they keep trying to come up with some kind of way for this guy to just go and have them go for another round, making it up there. And Nearguard eventually finally gives in, but, like, this is after some stretch of time. And we get to kind of see exactly... Here's what I love about this film. They give, like, an exact number of time accumulation. And that is what I wanted in the Zac Efron movie Gold. And that's what we get here. I'm like, oh my god, yes. Yeah. Give me that, like, exact number of days that these people have been in here, even though that's a miserable thing, to realize, like, oh my god, they were there for how long? Like, still, I'm just like, yeah, I need to know exactly to nth degree to realize how much time is passing, because I like that in survival films. So if I were to do a survival movie, I would immediately ask, like, you're gonna tell, like, you're gonna show somewhere, like, the accumulation of how long technically this person has been here for, right? Or eventually there's gonna be, like, towards the end where someone is gonna say, hey, yeah, you've been out there for 2 years? Yeah, because survival. So that's what I liked about Castaway. It's like, oh, you've been gone for X amount of days and so on and so forth. Where he kind of had, like, Tom Hanks was kind of like using these rocks and trying to, like, calculate, like, Aprils and Marches. And, like, he's like, yeah, I think the tide will be good right around this month. So Mickelson and Iverson are just realizing they're going to die here. And so Mickelson is to tell Iverson, we need to go back for that paper. And so they go and construct this sled that it's to be, like, pulled by humans. So it's a little bit like bigger looking sled. And so they go out there and they're, like, pulling this sled. They're getting this paperwork, realizing that, like, the rocks had kind of crumbled a little bit. And they're like, oh my god, did somebody steal this from us? But Mickelson makes the assumption it was probably a bear looking for something. So Mickelson and Iverson make their way back to this shack, and they're just, like, running out their food source, hoping at some point that some ship is just gonna magically come by and rescue them somehow or another. So Iverson at one point is to talk about, like, hey man, like, wouldn't it be nice if a hot air balloon would just be coming and flying by with some woman? Like, wouldn't that just be nice? Like, what would you do? And Mickelson is like, well, it's not possible. Like, you're just kind of being irrational here. And Iverson's like, no, like, what would happen if that just happened right now? It also gets to the point where both Iverson and Mickelson, like, spend so much time together. We have Iverson talking about, like, whether or not, like, he would eat Mickelson. And he asks him about it. It's like, well, hey, like, if we had to get to this scenario where we had to eat one another, would you? And Mickelson's like, really? Like, it seems a little grim. But Iverson's like, no, like, let's talk about it. Like, these guys go on and they're playing this record. And, like, that's kind of a kind of amusing thing for them. And so all of a sudden, Iverson is to slowly but surely lose his mind. Because we had Iverson who had this photo of these women, and Iverson was kind of picking one that was his favorite, that he just kind of randomly named some kind of girl, some kind of, like, nickname. And Mickelson was to go and name some other girl. And name her Nadia. Who we find out, or Naja, who I guess is a real girl. Somewhere out there. Naja Home. So we have the one point where Iverson, while they're in the tents with one another, while they're out exploring, like, I'm kind of jumping all over the place so I can kind of get certain scenes that I forgot about to just talk about them now, because it all feels like a random, like, thing when I can say these kind of anywhere. Iverson was to go on and mention how he was to pop his cherry by going to the red light district and finding some experienced woman that was much older than he was. And Iverson was to, after being with this woman, become very knowledgeable in the ways of which to please a woman. And Mickelson had a very different experience when he was 16 years old. He went on with, I think, his father to go on to the venereal disease section of the hospital. And so Mickelson is like, yeah, like, that is freaking awful to do to somebody. So, like, yeah, these guys had a very different experience when it came down to the ways of which to figure out about becoming a man, supposedly. So, if you could even say that's a point of becoming a man, probably becoming a man is just like, hey, like, become 18. Oh, you're 18? Oh, get older. Yeah. Go on and do this, like, number of lists of things that a normal person by your age would probably do. And hopefully it all works out after that, which it probably won't. So, all of a sudden, Mickelson is to one day go on to the observation deck thing of this ship, looking around, back and forth. All of a sudden, he sees this hot air balloon. Mickelson runs to it. He's like, oh my god, yeah, it's happened. It's happened. Oh my god, this hot air balloon. All of a sudden, Mickelson is to see his love of his life. And she's like, yes, I really missed you. And they kiss one another. And we find out that this woman is not actually real. That Mickelson is... There's some screws getting loose. Sadly enough. Hey, freaking it happens. Like, eventually you'll just, like... Every once in a while, you just be like, what... Is that table really green? No, it's blue? Okay. Screw getting loose. So... Mickelson starts to consistently see this woman to where he does not realize, like, he's just kind of lost in this woman consistently showing up, to where it just kind of overpowers his mind. Mickelson goes on and is talking to this woman. She's telling him, like, you do realize nobody's going to come for you, right? Like, you realize that you're going to die here. And Mickelson starts crying and starts desperately grabbing onto this woman to hug her. And technically this guy is hugging no one. But he's crying. Mickelson goes on to like, play some music all by himself in this little room. Goes on and starts dancing with this imaginary girl, Iverson. Starts to kind of look into the window of this little room, and he's just like, okay, like, I'll just kind of leave him, like, to himself. Like, hey, whatever he's doing, it's all right. So Iverson goes in the room, and Mickelson is kind of pushing Iverson out. Like, get away. Get out of the room. Iverson's like, okay, all right. So Iverson is to wake up one night or wake up one day and is tell Mickelson, like, well, hey, like, I guess it kind of gets to the point where, like, you start just weirdly dreaming about all these kinds of things. And maybe the girl that you were interested in, I was interested in. And, like, I'm sorry, Mickelson, but I don't know. There's something about that girl that you were thinking about. So all of a sudden, because of some weird, maybe wet dream of sorts, who knows, Iverson walks out of the hut. And Mickelson weirdly just takes that personally. And so all of a sudden, this woman is now like kind of in her pajamas or in her uh, like least amount of clothing, like saying that she had some dream affair with Iverson, and Mickelson just loses his mind. Sadly enough, this is a real person. But I'm just being honest. Like, the guy just goes after Iverson with this gun. He wants to shoot him. He has this knife, and he's just going like, I'm gonna come after you. I'm gonna come after you, Iverson. I'm gonna kill you. And so Mickelson fires this gun, and we consistently have Iverson who's showing this picture, telling Iverson it's not real, it's not real, and even the woman in Mickelson's fantasy or imagination is saying that she's not real either, that she's not real. And Mickelson is like, oh my god, like, whew, like I don't know what I was thinking, as he kind of hands over the gun, and Iverson goes on and is to put the gun in the other hut thing, and Iverson ends up coming back, and Mickelson is just like, you know what, I'm sorry about what I did, and Iverson's like, well, never happened. Like, hey, like, things are fine now. Like, let's let bygones be bygones. Let's just kind of make it through the rest of the day, kind of thing. We had also a moment where Mickelson was to have this kind of lump on the side of his neck. And we had Iverson who like kind of saw something before, kind of mentioned a little something about it, and Mickelson is like, oh, like I think it was like a bug bite or some kind of something, and like it kind of treated it as nothing. Mickelson starts like wearing weirdly just like these scarves and kind of like this kind of thing over his neck. Till the lump gets, I guess, pretty decent size. So Mickelson is telling Iverson, you need to lance whatever this is. You need to cut this out. I'm kind of wondering if it was like a staph infection or maybe it was any like number of things. But like they had to go on, like he had to go on and just kind of cut whatever this was, and like blood started like spraying a little bit. Mickelson was in absolute pain because there's no way to just nullify this. Like he had to go on and just cut through. So yeah, I'm kind of very in a roundabout way, just kind of covering all the moments in this movie. I'm not doing it perfect. It is what it is. Being honest. So the longer and longer we head into this story, all of a sudden we have this bear come through. I'm like, the bear again? Like, is it coming back for seconds technically? Even though it's not the same bear, probably, still. And so this bear is just kind of smacking against this window, like, hey, how's it going? So the guys are just trying to make noise, trying to scare this bear away. Desperately trying to cling onto this door, realizing that the gun is in the other hut. And they're just like, God. So the bear scampers off, runs off, like a bear does. Mickelson goes on and gets the other gun gets the gun from the hut. So Mickelson asks Iverson, it's like, how much resources do we really have left? Iverson is to say, it's like, well, not much. Like, really, like, we don't really have many bullets either. And Mickelson is just like, okay, we're just gonna have to make some last. They're gonna have to find some food randomly somewhere. All of a sudden, the two men forcibly need to wake up yet again as Mikkelsen is kind of shaking Iverson to get him up because they realize the bear is back, and so they're like, okay, let's get the gun out. Like, hey man, you're gonna have to get a really good shot at this because you're only gonna get one chance at murdering, sadly, this bear. So like, we got to try to do our best to just like stab the out of this bear. And like, we're definitely wanting to use this bear as like a food source because dwindling down. All of a sudden, the door opens and they're like rushing out. They're like, "What do we got to do? We got to stab. What do we got? What's going on?" All of a sudden, we have these guys that come back for these two, and they're like, "Oh my god! Oh my god! You guys are back! You guys came back for us, you schlubs! You sons of bitches!" So just this sigh of relief upon these two characters, like, oh my god, these people are back. Oh my, they came back for us. So we now go on and have Nirgard, who is going on and telling these people the findings of these two men, that they have discovered that Perry Island, or Ferry Island, is not to be an island, it's just another stretch of Greenland. And so Nirgard is doing this speech, talking about these guys, talking about these men. Then he's kind of wanting to usher them in, to have everybody just go on and just like, yeah, like, you survived, yeah, you did it. So Mikkelsen is to all of a sudden see a woman in the distance, Naja. And so Mikkelsen turns to Iverson, is telling him, it's like, is there an actual woman there? And Iverson's like, yeah. So Mikkelsen and this woman hug it out. And like, they just continue to hug it out. And then Mikkelsen is like, oh, yeah, like, hey, Iverson, meet this one girl. Like, yeah, like, we're best friends. So, and Nirgar is just like, hey guys, like, they're definitely here. They survived. Like, and they're just like, hey, could you give us like 2 seconds? Could you just stall a little bit more? Could you come up with something else to say about us? We really need to just kind of stretch this bad boy out. So then finally both of them come out there, everybody claps, and that's how the movie just ends and rattles off. The one thing also we had Iverson talk about Nicholson about, or Mikkelsen. It seems like a number of these characters were to be lucky. That at one point Iverson was to possibly go on and work on the Titanic, which eventually sunk. That Mikkelsen was to go on and possibly go with this guy who had traveled around the world and then had gone missing with his hot air balloon. And Mikkelsen was only 15 at the time. He was too young to go with this guy, this explorer. And that guy had gone missing, so Iverson's like, well, I guess he lucked out there because he would have died with that guy. The main theme at the end of this whole story is they're survivors. They had luck on their side. And like, that's the real true thing that they should have really gone on, and hopefully if they were to have time for a speech, that would have been like the one thing to say. It's like, yeah, we weirdly just had luck on our side. I don't know where it was. I don't know like why it didn't eventually give us a steak dinner every single night, but like, man, did these guys get like, they were miserable, but they were somehow lucky. So with that said, I think I'm going to wrap this bad boy up here. There's probably a lot of details that didn't go about in this film. Let me know in the comments below. I'm sure there's some details that I skipped around about because that's usually what happens when I go and talk about a movie and review and whatever. How do you do? So yeah, let me know how you felt about Against the Ice, a Netflix movie. Another one of those like I actually do thoroughly enjoy survival films, and it's not just the fact it's like, oh, I can watch these people be miserable at the luxury of my chair or couch or whatever. Uh, I I enjoy them, especially if there's kind of like this really good story beyond just like them desperate for food or water or comfort or whatever. Like if you kind of give me this like heartbreaking tale before we even get to the part where they're surviving, then like you immediately have my interest. You have me hooked. And you kind of get me with that in this story. And I probably didn't even grade this movie. Like it's a positive film. I would definitely say for people to go on and watch it. But a lot of people may not like survival films because they might think that it's boring. But I would say that this movie is like I would just say that it's a good film, but or no, I would probably just say that it's a solid okay film that is to be based on a true story, and I should have it way higher than that. Um, it has some fascinating stories, and like that's all that I would probably say about this film. It's like just a solid okay film. Um, just because like there's a lot of other survival films out there. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.